Hi, and welcome to our study of the Psalms. I don't think there is any portion of the Scriptures that has enlightened my mind and inflamed my heart more than the Psalms. I am drawn to the Psalms, praying through the Psalms, and constantly discovering how the full range of human experience and emotion are captured by the Psalms. The Psalms have taught me more about worship, more about prayer, and even more about God. No portion of Scripture embodies the fullness of the nature and character of God than the Psalms. As we study them together, I trust that your love for God, who is gracious and compassionate, slow to anger, and abounding in steadfast love, will be inflamed just as mine has. May God bless you in our study of the Psalms. Hi, in our study of the Psalms, we come to the third Psalm in the Psalter. We've looked at Psalm 1, which laid out two paths of response to God, the righteous path and the path of the wicked. And then in Psalm 2, we exalt the Anointed One, the Messiah of God. And now in Psalm 3, we come to the first of what is one of the most common types of psalms. It's a lament psalm in which the psalmist is engaged in an act of complaint. But you'll see how the Lord leads him through that to a time of great confident assurance. This is also the first psalm in which we have an ascription attached to it. An ascription means a heading at the beginning of the Psalter. And so this ascription says, a psalm of David when he fled from Absalom, his son. It's the first, for instance, time in which the word psalm itself is used about one of these poems. And the word psalm implies that the poem is actually to be used with musical accompaniment and sung instead of just spoken. And that's characteristic of this entire Psalter. So we recognize that the Psalter that we're studying, the Psalms that we're studying, are not just the prayer book of the Old Testament, but they are also the hymn book of the Old Testament. So we begin with a psalm. And it's also the first psalm that is ascribed to David. Now, David wrote a lot of the Psalms, and most of the Psalms that David wrote are included in the first two books of the Psalter. There are 5 books in the Psalter, and most of David's Psalms are in the first 2, but there are some Psalms of David that take place after that, but this is the first one that's ascribed to David. And this is also the first psalm that identifies the historical context in which David wrote the psalm, when he fled from Absalom, his son. And you'll remember that is included in the narrative in 2 Samuel chapters 15 and 16. And the context for that was that Absalom, a son that David really wasn't paying as much attention to as he should, began to develop around him some supporters and began to win the hearts of the people and undermine David's leadership. And so all of a sudden, his rebellion took place and David had to flee from Jerusalem. And he fled at night, and he fled barefoot, and he fled weeping, because this had taken him completely by surprise, and he was overwhelmed not only at the fact of rebellion, but the fact that the rebellion came from his own son, whom he loved very deeply. And so this was a tragic time for David as he fled out of Jerusalem, across the Kidron Valley into the Mount of Olives, weeping as he went. And this is the lament that he shares with his people. Eventually, after putting the pen to it and expressing it, it is one of the things that the church, as well as the people of Israel, have been able to use in their own worship experiences even to this day. O Lord, how many are my foes? How many are rising against me? Many are saying of my soul, there is no salvation for him in God. But you, O Lord, are a shield about me, my glory and the lifter of my head. I cried aloud to the Lord, and he answered me from his holy hill. I lay down and slept. I woke again, for the Lord sustained me. I will not be afraid of many thousands of people who have set themselves against me all around. Arise, O Lord, save me, O my God, for you strike all my enemies on the cheek. You break the teeth of the wicked. Salvation belongs to the Lord. Your blessings be on your people. That's the psalm that David pens in the Psalter, Psalm 3. Let's begin to take a look at the first stanza. This is the complaint that David lodges with God. O Lord, how many are my foes? Many are rising against me. Many are saying of my soul, there is no salvation for him in God. You know, David has a lot of enemies, and the more important and significant you are, the more enemies you're likely to have. But you know, it doesn't take very many enemies to make your life miserable. I remember when I was teaching and worked as a teacher educator, teaching lots of teachers and hearing their stories, particularly the ones that were in graduate school and were coming back to study teaching, how many of them would say, you know, I have this wonderful class except for this one student, and if they would just leave me alone, I'd be much happier. And so sometimes it doesn't take more than one to make your life miserable. But of course, in this particular case, there's one main adversary of David, and that's his own son Absalom, which makes his case even more reprehensible and more difficult to swallow. But Absalom has gathered around himself a great, massive number of supporters because he's been working behind the scenes to win the hearts of the people and has become antagonistic to David as his father and as the leader of Israel. And so David finds himself not only with Absalom as his adversary, but also of all of those who are following Absalom. And not only is there physical danger with David, Absalom wants to do away with him, and his followers want to kill David, but they also want to discourage David because they are crying out things like, there's no salvation for him in God. In other words, David, you don't stand a chance. You might as well give up. And so they're trying to communicate those kinds of discouraging sentiments to David. Now, how many of you have had to experience that kind of threat, that you actually have enemies who really are trying to discourage you as much as to destroy you? Well, David has those enemies, and we certainly have our enemies as well. We might think about who our enemies really are. Maybe you don't have human enemies. Maybe that's the case. And I can't really think that I have human enemies either. Maybe I don't have human enemies because I'm not bold enough. If I was bolder about my faith, I probably would have more enemies. But I can't think of a human being who is my enemy. Yet I know that I have an enemy. He's the enemy of my soul. He's Satan. And he wants to drag me down. He wants to discourage me. He wants to accuse me, even though I've been forgiven. He wants to exploit whatever weaknesses I have. He wants to destroy my ministry. Now, I'm not astute enough or significant or prominent enough that maybe Satan directly has an in with me, but Satan has lots of his lieutenants. He has plenty of demons that do his dirty work, and so I'm sure that they would love to and do afflict me from time to time. So I do have an enemy of my soul, the devil himself and his lieutenants that are trying to drag me down and drag my ministry down and drag my relationships down. Everything about my walk with the Lord, they want to discourage. But at the same time, as I really think about my enemies, I realize I have the greatest enemy in me. I'm my own worst enemy in many ways, because I still have the sinful nature dwelling within me, and that drags me down and discourages me even more than anything else. So we all have enemies of one sort or another, and so it is appropriate to call upon God and offer Him that complaint when we find ourselves afflicted by our enemies in whatever way that kind of thing happens. But the next stanza, the mood of this psalm changes dramatically. But you, O Lord, are a shield about me, my glory and the lifter of my head. I cried aloud to the Lord, and He answered me from His holy hill. Here's where David draws upon his past experiences. You know, David's conflict with Absalom wasn't his first rodeo. His first real serious adversary, his first real serious enemy was Saul. He'd been on the run from Saul. Saul had tried to kill him numerous times. God had protected him from Saul. And so in this particular case with Absalom, David recalls how God preserved his life and got him through those experiences. And so he says, you, O Lord, are a shield about me. He had experienced under the affliction of Saul the protection of God. God protected him supernaturally, and so that Saul would die and that David would survive. But you, O Lord, are my glory and the lifter of my head. That's a wonderful phrase, the lifter of my head. Even in the midst of his deepest and darkest discouragements, God lifted his spirit, lifted his head up, and we need that, don't we, from time to time. And so in the midst of these afflictions, David recalls that God not only spared his life, but encouraged his soul all at the same time. David also says, I cried aloud to the Lord, and he answered me from his holy hill. He knows God to be a prayer-answering God. And so he remembers that God answered his prayer in the case of Saul, and God will answer his prayer now in the case of Absalom's rebellion. And so this stanza gives David great encouragement and helps him to know that God will get him through these difficult times, even though he's offering this as a complaint or a lament. Then the next stanza is interesting as well, where David says, I lay down and slept, I woke again, for the Lord sustained me. I will not be afraid of many thousands of people who have set themselves against me all around. This is a stanza that establishes for liturgical churches, churches that like to use the Psalms in various places and contexts, that this establishes Psalm 3 as a morning psalm. And so for those that follow liturgical patterns of worship, both in their personal devotions as well as in the corporate worship of the church, Psalm 3 shows up as a morning devotional psalm. And the reason for that is that David says, I lay down and slept, and I woke again, for the Lord sustained me. He's waking up in the morning, having been sustained and protected during the night. Now think about that for a moment. David is on the run from, in this case, Absalom. He has an enemy who wants to kill him. How likely are you to get a good night's sleep when that applies to you? But David, knowing that God is his shield and the one who lifts his head, knows that he can lay his head down at night and have a good night's sleep because God will protect him. And that's not usually the posture we take when we are under the gun from our enemies. We really don't want to go to sleep. We want to sleep with one eye open in case we get attacked in the middle of the night or something like that. But David's not like that. He says, I lay down and slept, I woke again, for the Lord sustained me. And then when he wakes, he has all the confidence in the world. He says, I will not be afraid of many thousands of people who have set themselves against me all around. Knowing that God is in charge here and that God is the one who really will protect him and is his shield, he has no fear, even if there are thousands of enemies seeking his demise. And as a result, he can get comfortable sleep at night and awake refreshed and ready to face the challenges that each day brings. And we really need to apply that to our lives, don't we? I don't know about you, but I don't always get a good night's sleep. Sometimes thoughts preoccupy me in ways that drag me down and give me thoughts of consternation in various ways. But I need to come back to this psalm and remember that God is my shield, and he answers my prayer, and he is the one who protects and provides for me, and he will do it with respect to my enemies as well. So I ought to be able to sleep well at night. And so let's put that into practice ourselves, and as a result be able to wake refreshed, able to tackle anything that God sends our way, knowing that God will provide for us and protect us, and we don't have to be afraid of any of our enemies. And then the final stanza goes like this: Arise, O Lord, save me, O my God, for you strike all my enemies on the cheek, you break the teeth of the wicked. This is David's war cry, actually, as it were. And the phrase that he uses, arise, O Lord, save me, O my God, that first phrase, arise, O Lord, is what the people in the Old Testament, the people of Israel, used to say in the wilderness when the glory of God and the glory cloud, the Shekinah glory, would lift up, and they would go off and take the people, lead the people into battle, and take the Ark of the Covenant with them. Moses would declare, arise, O Lord, and go fight our battles for us, because salvation belongs to the Lord. And so David gets to the point in this prayer when he recognizes his enemies, he's calling on God to do the heavy lifting here. And that's a great instruction for us, because the text concludes this way: salvation belongs to the Lord, your blessing on your people Israel. And so salvation does belong to the Lord, and that's an important consideration to recognize. We trust in the Lord for our salvation, do we not? If you're trusting in yourself, I think you've misplaced where your trust ought to be, because it's God who saves us. And so whatever complaint we might want to offer, whatever enemies we might have, Psalm 3 teaches us to have confidence in God, who is our shield, confidence in God, who is the one who lifts our head, confidence in God because He answers our prayers, confidence in God because of what He's done in the past. We can trust Him for what He does in the future, and salvation comes to Him, and we can ask God to do the heavy lifting and take our enemies out. And so that's what this psalm teaches us. It's a wonderful psalm of encouragement for those who are going through difficult times. And we certainly, as a community, have gone through difficult times, and you all have, as we all have, our own enemies that afflict us. But God is sufficient for even our most dark enemies, even the ones in our own souls. And so read this psalm, pray through this psalm, and I think you'll find that you'll be encouraged in the process. Thank you for listening. Psalm 3, welcome once again to Searching the Psalms. Good to be with you. I'm Pastor Andy.